An ageless force of destruction has been awakened.
30 years ago, they never found any corpse.
Your favorite fire-breathing monster is back.
Brings back memories. Here we are recording in Studio B.
Studio B.
B for basement. Hi, everybody. I'm Mr. Bangers, a.k.a. Zach. This is my buddy here, Mr. Mash, a.k.a. JD. Before we get to our topic today, we got another like on the Facebook group, and I'm keeping my promise. Every time we get a like, I'm going to thank the person who did it. Thank you, Bill, for liking the show. We really appreciate it.
You're okay in our book. I'm fist bumping you right now. You just can't see it.
Here we are in our third part of our Godzilla-a-thon.
Godzilla-a-thon.
Are you sick of talking about Godzilla movies yet, Mr. Mash?
I'm never sick of talking about Godzilla movies.
That's right. Godzilla intrinsically makes everything better. Obviously, both of us love the Showa Godzilla series. Many of those films are great. Many of them are incredibly entertaining. We're huge fans of those. But the Godzilla series of my childhood is the one we'll be talking about today. The Heisei Era, 80s and 90s Godzilla films. These are the ones that reignited my interest in the franchise in the 90s.
One of the first Godzilla movies I ever saw was Godzilla 1985.
I'd not seen 85 until this year. It's so hard to get a hold of these days.
Back in the day, my grandmother and I used to go shop around at a lot of yard sales and stuff. I always look for movies.
You can find some weird shit at yard sales.
Right. We, at one point in time, owned 3 copies of Godzilla 1985 because my grandmother would go out shopping without me and see it and couldn't remember that we owned it.
We've got 9 things to discuss today, going from some of the most widely beloved Godzilla films to perhaps the most widely loathed Godzilla film. But let's start with the beginning of the Heisei period, 1984's The Return of Godzilla, released here in the States as Godzilla 1985, which is the title I've always known it as.
For 30 years, he has been resting. Now he's back, and he's going to make up for lost time.
All new power, brand new destruction. Godzilla, the legend is reborn.
As we said last time, the Showa series ended in 75 with Terror of MechaGodzilla. But that was never meant to be the end of the franchise. There were a lot of potential ideas tossed around in the intervening decade. There was a film where Godzilla would have fought Bagan, the famous lost kaiju, which has been considered for several films and never used for any of them. One idea was Godzilla versus the Gargantuas.
Would have been cool.
They
would have had 2 votes.
Yeah. There was an idea thrown around that would have been called Godzilla versus Asuka Fortress, where he would have fought a giant robot. And even a straight-up remake of the original was considered. It took until the early 80s for an idea to take hold. The previous year, they had re-released all of the original series in a festival package, and that had been really successful. And they realized there was still an audience for this character. And out of that came this film, Godzilla 1985, as we'll call it.
The Return of Godzilla. How many damn times has he returned?
That title does get to the point and let you know that Godzilla's back. The original Japanese title is just Gojira, which is even more confusing. So you remember what this movie's about?
Godzilla fights a Japanese-made spaceship.
That does kind of happen. The Heisei period is what we would call in today's language a reboot. They had ignored all the previous sequels. This is a direct sequel to the original 1954 film. And that was ahead of its time because now studios are rebooting everything.
I hate that word, reboot.
I'm not a big fan of it myself, but this film begins with a journalist discovering a derelict fishing boat, very similar to the opening of the original. And on this boat, he finds a bunch of corpses, a giant radioactive sea louse, and a survivor who claims that their boat saw Godzilla surface for the first time in 30 years. Godzilla has returned. One of the things he does when he first shows up is attack a Soviet submarine, which almost starts World War III, and this forces the Japanese government to acknowledge that Godzilla is back. As the UN is arguing about what to do with Godzilla, he shows up in Tokyo and starts ruining shit. And it's up to the journalist, the survivor's sister, and a scientist to see if they can stop the monster and prevent Russia from dropping a nuke on Japan. Its tone is very different from the 70s Godzilla movies. This almost feels less like a kaiju film and more like a big-budget disaster flick.
Yeah.
It's very focused on the global element. The Prime Minister of Japan is a central character in this film. He's forced to make hard decisions. Both the Americans and the Russians are are very eager to launch nuclear weapons, and the Japanese administrator has to say, we will not use nuclear weapons on Japanese soil. The film is really all about Cold War tensions. It really attempts to reconceive Godzilla in the context of the Cold War. On paper is an interesting idea, but I don't think the film makes it work.
No.
There's all this talk about both Russia and America wanting to launch nuclear weapons. Eventually, a missile does get launched. That is in there to revive Godzilla for the second act turn. Though I did like Godzilla eating a nuclear submarine, and this nearly starting World War III. That's an interesting idea. What do you think of Godzilla's look in this film? He was drastically redesigned.
He's beefier. He's more sinister looking.
He's definitely beefier. The Heisei series would run with Godzilla as very heavily muscled, extremely stocky. Every version of Godzilla in this series of films has thunder thighs.
Some of my favorite Godzilla suits came from this era.
Special effects had advanced a lot in the 10 years between this film and the last one. There's a lot of animatronics in Godzilla's face. He's overall much more realistic looking and expressive. He's back to being slow and lumbering. And I generally liked the design from 84, but I'm not real crazy about the face. He looks almost feline, and he has these perpetually bared fangs, and his snout is very short. And I'm not real crazy about that. Do you like 1984?
For the most part.
I am iffy on this film, and there's a big reason why. It kind of turns Godzilla into a wimp.
You talk about the spaceship.
The Super X, which would be a reoccurring element in the series. High-tech hovercraft that can withstand Godzilla's nuclear breath. It doesn't seem realistic to me.
Are we really contemplating that?
The realism of the Godzilla universe, they knock out Godzilla with a single missile, and he's down for a while. That's bullshit. It wouldn't happen that way. And there are other things. He's attacking a nuclear power plant, and that sequence overall works very well. He's sucking the nuclear energy out of the core, and then some birds fly overhead, and he's distracted by the birds and goes and follows them.
Yeah, they make him stupid.
Yeah, and when he attacks Tokyo, it's not as destructive. He walks around the buildings instead of through them. There's some good destruction. He drops a building on the Super X, which I really appreciate. I like seeing where his foot falls through the street into the subway, and he stumbles forward into a big building. But overall, the destruction seems restrained. Is that really what you want to do in your big-budget Godzilla reboot? Shouldn't he just totally fucking burn Tokyo to the ground, like he did in 54? And then the way they defeat Godzilla in this film, I dislike immensely.
Where they echo the sound of the birds, and then he stumbles into the volcano.
Yeah, he just walks into a volcano. It treats Godzilla too much like a dumb animal. That's very against what otherwise the film is trying to do, trying to reestablish him as this super destructive force of nature. I'm assuming you've only seen the American version, because the Japanese version is not widely available here. There's one thing about the Japanese version that is really not good. Even though Godzilla is presented as a villain in this film, the human characters, scientists, and the Japanese prime minister are still very sympathetic to Godzilla. As he's falling into the volcano at the end of the film, they actually shed a single tear. Does that happen in the American cut?
I don't think so.
The Japanese cut takes it even further, because then the super mushy love ballad plays over the end credits. The song actually features the lyrics, "Goodbye, Godzilla, my old friend. Sayonara until we meet again." Is that really the tone you want to go with your big-budget disaster movie? This film is obviously historic for being the first film in the Heisei series, but it's also historic for being the last Godzilla film to be dramatically re-edited in America. The U.S. cut does one clever thing that brings back Raymond Burr. On paper, anyway, it's an interesting idea to bring back that character from the original film. What they do with him, he spends the whole movie in a bunker in the U.S. He never interacts with Godzilla or Japan in any way. Some of the dialogue in the American cut, as Godzilla's destroying Tokyo, one of the sergeants in the Pentagon says, "That's a hell of an urban renewal plan they've got over there. Hey man, people are dying." Most notable cut, I think, in the American version is in the Japanese version. The Russian captain on the submarine is rushing to try and stop the nuclear missile from launching. In the American cut, they recut it to make it look like he is trying to launch the nuclear missile, which is a move so xenophobic it's almost funny. All of these things are problematic, but I actually think the American cut is actually a little better paced. I feel like the film was not as successful as Toho was hoping it would be. It took them 5 years to get a sequel out.
Really?
Biollante did not come out until 1989. This film was written by a contest winner, a dentist. That shows in the plot of the movie, which is a little out there. It's not quite Ghidorah crazy. Godzilla vs. Biollante is just a little bit off the beaten path.
Yeah, but it's underappreciated Godzilla movies.
I agree.
I think people view it as, oh, well, Godzilla fights a giant flower.
On paper, that premise sounds kind of goofy.
This is the film that introduces the psychic, right? Psychic
Yeah, Miki is introduced in this film. One of the reasons why this movie is underrated is because it was unavailable for a long long time in this country. And it came out on DVD just 2 years ago.
Well, I have it on Blu-ray because I'm better.
Ooh, good for you. The plot of this film actually picks up right where the last one left off. In the wake of Godzilla's rampage on Tokyo, scientists are attempting to recover his cells, which are then stolen by American mercenaries. And those mercenaries are then killed by a Middle Eastern assassin who steals the G-cells. One of the main characters in the film is Dr. Shiragami, thank you. In the Middle East, his daughter is killed in a terrorist attack.
Isn't he doing something with plants? Make some kind of medicine or something?
Something like that, yes. 5 years later, after that, the Japanese government is worried Godzilla's going to reawake. He's still underneath the volcano at this point. They're using Godzilla's DNA to make a bioweapon that they can use against him. This film has a lot of little intrigue. The Americans and the Middle Easterns both want this weapon. Out of the same environment, Dr. Shiragami combines Godzilla's DNA, his daughter's soul, and a rose to make Biollante the title villain. What I really like about this film, for the first time in the series' history, Japan is actually ready for Godzilla. In the 5 years since he last showed up, they've hooked up all sorts of things to counteract him. And one of the things you mentioned is Miki, who would become a recurring character, a psychic designed to communicate with both Godzilla and other kaiju. I really like both the Miki character and the actress playing her, Megumi Odaka. The plot of the film revolves around the anti-nuclear energy bacteria, and that raises an interesting idea. By 1989, the Cold War was cooling off. It did not seem like the world was going to end in nuclear fire. What's the next super weapon? For a while there, anyway, the buzzword was germ warfare. The movie is setting up Godzilla's the nuke, Biollante's germ warfare, and that's something the Heisei series would continue to do, creating new villains for Godzilla that are representative of the next terrible super weapon.
Right.
The Super X gets an upgrade in this film, too.
Yeah, no one cares about the Super X.
I like the Super X2 better, though. It's not as goofy looking, first off. The mirror designed to throw Godzilla's heat breath back at him is a clever idea.
Oh, really? How'd it work out for him, Zach?
It works for a little bit. Like all the military's weapons in Godzilla movies, it works for about one sequence, and then Godzilla overpowers it.
He's the Superman of Kaiju and has a different power in every...
I like this film. Its script is busy. There's a lot going on in this film. There are many subplots. There's the hero and the heroine who aren't really important. There's Dr. Shiragami and his nefarious plans, and he's sort of the focus for the first half of the film, and then disappears for a large section in the middle half. This intrigue about the evil Americans who have these ridiculous accents, the mysterious Arab agent with his sunglasses always shooting people from his car. All of this stuff is going on, and you really do wish they would just release Godzilla already.
I do have one gripe with you. You talked about Biollante being the villain. She's more of the hero.
Hero is maybe not the right word, but Godzilla continues to be a destructive force of nature, and Biollante is opposing him in that regard.
I don't view it as germ warfare bursting the atom bomb. Godzilla is usually the wrath of nature. Biollante is Mother Nature's way of retaliating against Godzilla, who stands for the atom bomb.
The giant plant, that interpretation can't be avoided. They redesigned Godzilla a little bit from the last film. He's just as brawny as before, but...
elongated the face.
Yeah, they gave him a much more reptilian face. I like the look Godzilla has in this movie. The series would support that design they would more or less stick with throughout the rest of the Heisei period. When I think of Godzilla, this is the suit I think of. This is my version of Godzilla. The big beefy thighs and the big brawny chest and the longer neck and the longer snout and little ears on top.
Right.
And maybe counteract the clean destruction in the last movie. Godzilla really causes a lot of destruction in this film. He blows up battleships and airplanes in this. You see a lot of debris fly from the explosion. Perhaps a reference to Godzilla Raids Again. He destroys Osaka in this movie, and he really tears it up.
Puts on a new one.
This is how Godzilla should act, in my opinion. What do we think of Biollante as a character?
I, for one, really like the suit design. I think it's interesting.
It's certainly a memorable image.
Now, the first time we see Biollante is the giant rose.
Yeah, the
that's
rose
a little
one.
ridiculous. Looks cheap.
The giant rose petals look a little fake.
The later form where she absorbs more of Godzilla's energy and becomes more Godzilla-like. I really like that. The glowing chest.
Very fearsome look.
The tentacles with mouths on them.
I do love the little tentacles with little snappers on the end. It does remind you that Biollante's basically Audrey 2. You wouldn't think a giant plant would pose that much of a threat, and at first it doesn't. Godzilla takes care of the rose form quickly. The second form, where it explodes out of the earth in a very dramatic entrance, actually does some damage to him. It impales him, vomits yellow pollen or slime or something into his face. Godzilla's given a run for his money in this film. That final fight is great. The action sequences and the effects in this film make up for a screenplay that's a little crowded. When Biollante is defeated, what happens?
I don't remember.
The daughter's face
floats
out
up,
of the body into space. As the end credits are playing, we see a giant rose orbiting the Earth. Kooky stuff. Aside from a score, which is really inappropriate, really going for like a John Williams thing.
Speaking of the score, they take the original Godzilla theme and heavy metal it up.
Yeah, they bring back the Ifukube Godzilla March, which is always sorely missed when it doesn't appear.
How's it go again? You're so good at doing it. Yeah, so it's that, but taken to the power of metal. This is to symbolize that this is Godzilla for a new era.
He's a little more dangerous.
In Japan's latest Godzilla movie, this is the great showdown. Godzilla taking on the three-headed monster, King Ghidorah. But some might regard the plot of the movie as anti-U.S. Godzilla, once a dinosaur friendly to Japan, helped Japanese defeat Americans in a World War II Pacific battle. But at the same time, they don't want Japan to become too strong and upset the world balance of power. So King Ghidorah is created to keep Japan in check. Godzilla may win the mortal battle against King Ghidorah. Will Japan be saved from Godzilla? Taylor Henry, CNN, Tokyo.
It took until 1991 for the Heisei series to really take off. I think they realized that the public wanted to see the new beefed-up version of Godzilla fight new beefed-up versions of his classic enemies. I'm talking about Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. It's right there in the title, guys. King Ghidorah's back.
And it's a title that delivers.
This one is a favorite of mine, perhaps the best of this period. It's also really responsible for turning me back into a Godzilla fan when I was a teenager. Like I said, I watched some of the older movies and the cartoons as a kid, but then I hadn't really thought about it for a long time. I think it's probably in the wake of the 1998 TriStar Godzilla.
Oh boy.
When a lot of these Heisei films were coming out on VHS over here for the first time. I went to Blockbuster and I said, what Godzilla movies have you got? And they took me to the sci-fi section. There was Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah and Godzilla and Mothra Battle for Earth. These next two movies are really responsible for reigniting enthusiasm for Godzilla. What do you remember about Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, plot-wise?
Plot-wise, isn't there a race of humans from the future
Futurians!
who are, like, actually bad or something? There's good Futurians and bad Futurians or something like that. The plot's a little convoluted, I think.
That's a fair criticism. The plot is indeed a little convoluted. This journalist, Kenichiro, is researching an urban legend they have. A group of soldiers in World War II found a dinosaur on an island. Meanwhile, a UFO appears. It's actually a time machine from the future. And these Americans appear from the spaceship and say, Godzilla's gonna destroy Japan, like, for real this time. The Americans take them to the island back in World War II, and they remove Godzilla from the island. But it turns out they shouldn't have trusted them. The Futurians are actually evil. Bring King Ghidorah into the present with them. And now the Japanese government is forced to bring Godzilla back. Once again, Japan's greatest foe becomes its only hope.
That's right.
Sure, the plot is a little convoluted.
Doesn't Godzilla become too much? A good Futurian goes forward in time to use our technology to make Mecha King Ghidorah,
Yes.
and then bring him back to the past to kick Godzilla's ass.
Yeah, because after he defeats King Ghidorah, of course he's Godzilla, so he just goes right back to doing what he does, which is destroying Japan. In this movie, he destroys Shinjuku. The thing I really like about this movie is that it brings back some of the Showa silliness, some of the sci-fi absurdity, which adds so much energy to this movie. There's so much fun stuff going on. Time travel, nefarious villains, teleportation, there's an android, we're going to talk more about him in a minute, laser guns, jetpacks, genetically engineered pets, and even cyborg giant monsters. The future people wear pastel jumpsuits because they're from the future, man. And they travel around in this beautiful flying saucer. My favorite thing about this movie is M11, the android. One sequence where they're on Lagos Island, and he's supposed to be running at super fast speed, but for some reason they suspended the actor on a crane, moving around, moving his arms back and forth, and he's like making a noise. It's beautiful. Throwing one-liners as he's shooting bad guys. It's a blast. I don't know the name of that actor, but he's either really good at playing an emotionless robot or he's just a terrible actor. Either way, he's perfect for it. Another thing I really appreciate is that it gives Godzilla a definitive origin story.
No.
He was a dinosaur that somehow survived to the modern day, living on one of the islands in the Pacific. During World War II, this Godzillasaurus, that's what they call it, saves a group of Japanese soldiers from the advancing American forces. He saves the Japanese soldiers and they salute him, and they assume that he would die there because he was injured. Later on in the 50s, that's where they dropped the H-bomb test. By rooting his origin in World War II, it says Godzilla was a legend even before he destroyed Tokyo. And he's now a symbol of Japan because he saves the Japanese soldiers from the American troops, so now he is intrinsically a part of the country's history.
So bold.
One of the soldiers from that island is now a very successful businessman. Throughout the film, he is convinced Godzilla is Japan's defender because of what happened. And as Godzilla is rampaging through Shinjuku, he stops at this man's building. The man and the monster look at each other for a minute. Godzilla closes his eyes, thinks, almost as if he's remembering. In the middle of all the destruction, the film gets very quiet. Immediately afterwards, Godzilla destroys the building and kills the guy. Godzilla is not just a symbol of Japan, he's a symbol of Japan's sometimes troubling history. At the time this movie came out, there was actually some controversy. Some people claim this movie was anti-American. I would say that that is 100% correct. This movie is painting Americans in bad lights. The villains of the film are American, and they are evil, man. They remove Godzilla from the history. If Godzilla is now a symbol of Japan, by removing him from history, they're trying to uncreate Japan. What do you think think of Godzillasaurus, the prototype Godzilla?
I mean, that's fine. What the people are really here for, Zach, you see, is to hear about the monster fight.
I know.
Who watches a Godzilla movie for all that zappy crap?
That stuff is interesting sometimes, though.
Godzilla's ripping off the action.
King Ghidorah is back, and they don't mess with his design much at all.
No, it's pretty much the same.
They beef him up a little bit. They realize that King Ghidorah is an iconic design and doesn't need any tinkering with.
They gave him thunder thighs.
How is King Ghidorah created in the film? Instead of leaving the dinosaur on Lagos Island, the time travelers leave something else there.
King Ghidorah's head.
No, they leave genetically engineered pets they have called Dorats. Basically, they look like little King Ghidorahs with these cartoon anime heads. And I hate the Dorats, but King Ghidorah's awesome. And I really enjoy his rampage. One of the things he does that's really cool is he actually lands on top of a building. The building collapses under his weight.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And that's all fun. The fight between him and Godzilla has some wonderful stuff. Ghidorah entangling Godzilla with his neck.
Yeah.
And in addition to bringing back some of the wackier sci-fi elements from the classic era, it also makes the fight a little bigger, a little more theatrical. Godzilla grabs King Ghidorah by his tail and body slams him into the ground a couple of times. King Ghidorah trying to curb stomp Godzilla. It doesn't work out.
Hurls lightning as usual. Something that I've noticed the Heisei series utilizes the beam weapons more.
That is very true. Some people dislike that. They prefer the monster wrestling.
I like a good even blend.
One of the things you really love about this movie is Mecha King Ghidorah.
Well, yeah, it's a badass design.
How can you make King Ghidorah better? Oh, make him a cyborg. That's how you do it.
Yeah, you make him a fucking cyborg. The cyborg wings and
a third cyborg head.
And cyborg leg braces. Not cyborg legs, just braces.
That final fight between Godzilla and Mecha King Ghidorah, though a little short, still definitely delivers the goods. But you really haven't lived until you've seen a cyborg space dragon carry a radioactive dinosaur over the ocean in handcuffs.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
100% serious when I said that Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah is one of my favorite Godzilla films. The original...
Up there, huh?
It's like the original Monster Zero in this one. Really love this movie immensely. After bringing back King Ghidorah, perhaps Godzilla's most famous enemy, who's the next obvious choice?
Gotta be Mothra.
It's gotta be Mothra.
But how do we make Mothra more of a threat? We give her a buddy!
Mothra gains an evil twin, basically. It was released in Japan as just Godzilla vs. Mothra, and when they brought it over here, they changed it to Godzilla and Mothra, The Battle for Earth, and I like that title better. I think it distinguishes it a little more from the 60s, Mothra vs. Godzilla. This movie was a huge hit. It was the highest grossing Japanese film of the year, and it was number 2 behind Jurassic Park for highest grossing of the year, period.
Noticing a little bit of a trend.
The plot for this film, Godzilla's woken up when a meteor very conveniently lands right next to him, waking him up. That meteor also causes a typhoon, which washes up a giant egg. The government hires Fujita, who's a treasure hunter. He's a very much an Indiana Jones-style treasure hunter, to go get the egg.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
There on Infant Island, they discovered the 2 little fairies, who in this version are called the Cosmos. They explain that millions of years ago, aliens came to Earth, and they created Mothra to be their protector. The Earth, which is a living, breathing organism in this film, was offended by their presence and created Batra to combat them. We know Mothra, and here's Batra, Mothra's evil double. Right on cue, as soon as the film mentions them, they show back up. And naturally, Godzilla's going to come in conflict with them in time. I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that this movie was rushed into production after the big success of King Ghidorah. The script is not as smooth as the previous movie. Batra and Godzilla fight, and then they're swallowed up by a volcano and don't show up again until the end of the film. Batra changes into a bat, not like Mothra, where it goes for a cocoon period. It just changes whenever it wants to, I guess.
Looks more like a moth than a bat.
Batra's a catchy name. And this movie is actually a quasi-remake of Mothra vs. Godzilla. The same thing happens where a corporation kidnaps Mothra's fairies.
Mothra hates it when you steal her fairies.
That's the only thing that really pisses her off. As a caterpillar, she rampages through Japan. Batra destroyed the Tokyo Tower earlier, so she cocoons herself against the Diet Building. Obviously is following the outline of that original film to a degree. They didn't really change King Ghidorah's design very much, and they don't really change Mothra's design very much.
I guess they didn't do that because of Batra. They figured the Batra would be like a redesign of Mothra almost.
As a butterfly, she is slightly fluffier.
And her eyes light up.
What about Batra? Batra is the death metal version of Mothra.
I prefer the Batra larva to the Mothra larva. I think it's a very cool design. The rhino horn is a lightning bolt.
It has a giant horn that shoots energy out, and it's covered with spikes. The idea was to make Batra look as dangerous as possible.
I like the Mothra moth design better.
I prefer the Batra larva to the Batra Amajo, crown of horns on his head, and he continues the whole thing of being covered with sharp things. His wings look tattered. I'm a big fan of the character. Overall, they successfully created an interesting new character. Even though this film is flawed flawed to a degree. It is action-packed.
Oh, it's got a lot of action.
Batra really destroys Tokyo. As a larva, he gives the city its most full stomping since the original Godzilla. Godzilla shows up as the egg is being carried across the ocean, and right onto the egg hatches, and immediately they start fighting. And they revisit that great visual of Mothra biting Godzilla's tail, which is a lot of fun. As Godzilla and Batra are fighting underneath the ocean, he grabs Batra by the tail and body slams him a couple of times. The big battle royale, the three-way battle at the end of the film. Unimpeachably awesome.
It's one of the best fights in the Heisei series.
Yeah, they really got it right. Batra slices a building in half and drops that on Godzilla, which slows him down for about a minute.
Batra does have razor wings. I forgot about that.
Well, he's overall much sharper.
See what you did
I see
there.
what you did there. We haven't mentioned Godzilla has gained a new superpower. Toho officially calls it the nuclear pulse. As a kid, I always called it the energy dome.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, where he projects his nuclear energy out of his body. That creates this big shockwave. When he does that in this film, it sends Mothra flying backwards into a building. Mothra and Batra are fighting at first, but eventually they decide that Godzilla's a bigger threat. Let's team up, you and I. And that's when the fight gets really awesome. They're fighting at an amusement park. Yokohama Cosmo World. This is a real place. At one point in time, hold the record for the biggest Ferris wheel in the world. Godzilla's about to drop that Ferris wheel on Mothra when Batra swoops in, grabs it, and then drops the Ferris wheel on Godzilla. That shit's fun. Mothra gains a much more extensive arsenal. She can shoot laser beams out of her eyes.
I thought it was antenna.
Maybe it is the antenna. She can shoot laser beams. Mothra still has her poison powder. This time, it creates a reflective surface so that Godzilla's breath is bound back at him.
Yeah, I don't like that. I like the regular just kick the shit out of Godzilla poison powder, you know? I always do this when I talk about the poison powder.
Always move your hands.
She uses her wings to spread the powder.
I do enjoy this film a lot, but the ending is downbeat. Batra and Mothra pick up Godzilla and are carrying him over the ocean. And as they're carrying him, Godzilla tears his throat out.
The way it should be.
They both go into the ocean. The movie gets very solemn. Fairies explain Batra was going to destroy a meteor that's going to hit the Earth in 5 years, but now Mothra's going to do it. Getting all that exposition dumped on us at the very end is unwieldy.
Yeah, is that in the Japanese version?
Yeah, I'm assuming. From this point on, the films, when they were brought over here, were dubbed, they were uncut.
Okay.
The box office prognosticator said at the time, this is the romantic comedy version of a Godzilla movie. They did a poll in the 80s, they found out that Mothra is the most popular kaiju with women, and this movie has a love story between Fujita and his ex-wife. They have a daughter, and they get back together over the course of the film. Some people think that's why this movie was so successful. It catered both men and women. I mean, I don't know, maybe. Bringing back Godzilla's former enemies had worked out so far. Who's Godzilla's third most famous enemy after Ghidorah and Mothra?
Anguirus?
That is incorrect.
It would have to be MechaGodzilla.
MechaGodzilla. Accordingly, the next film, 1993, Godzilla vs. MechaGodzilla, was released...
Doesn't the Super X come back in this shit?
No, there's a different super ship in this one. The Garuda. Released in Japan as just Godzilla vs. MechaGodzilla. They gave it a 2 over here to help distinguish it from the 70s version. In addition to bringing back MechaGodzilla, it brings back 2 other members of Godzilla's supporting cast.
Rodan?
Probably Godzilla's 4th most popular enemy.
Rodan's not really an enemy.
I always imagined them as rivals. Also, reinvent the Son of Godzilla concept.
No.
Yeah. It starts with a very realistic assumption that if giant monsters existed and were stomping Tokyo to the ground on a yearly basis, the UN would want to get involved. They form the United Nations Godzilla Countermeasure Center, I think is what it's called. They build MechaGodzilla. The same scientists go to this island, which has been heavily polluted by radiation, and they find Rodan and an egg. Out of this egg hatches a baby Godzilla. Miki and another girl named Azusa bond with baby.
One thing that's always bothered me a little bit, why was the baby inside the egg not a Rodan?
They explain that. The Godzillosaurus must be a parasitic species that lays their eggs in the nest of other animals.
Yeah.
Because of that, Rodan and Godzilla both have a bond with Baby. The military uses Baby Godzilla as bait to lure out both Godzilla and Rodan, so MechaGodzilla can destroy them. And the script is focused. It's 4 monsters in the movie in a way that makes sense. One of the things that is strong about this movie is the relationship between Azusa and Baby. That sounds terrible. A cute, cuddly baby Godzilla that people can make friends with. But
I like that idea.
What monster fan wouldn't want their own baby dinosaur?
I want a little pet Godzilla.
Who wouldn't? I really love how they show the bond the girl has with the monster. In one scene, they're sharing burgers together.
Yeah.
And they play catch with her shoe. I guess it goes up against cuddly at times, especially at the end, bidding their farewell, and they both shed a single tear.
It makes more sense than they were shedding a tear at the end of 85.
Yeah, definitely. This movie has a big problem in that you don't really have anybody to root for. Godzilla remains a destructive force. The scientists who are combating him are not really nice people. They're willing to use the innocent baby as bait. The way they try to kill Godzilla is very cruel. The version of MechaGodzilla in this movie, which is the least important monster in the movie, even though it gets top billing. What do you think of MechaGodzilla II, as the fans refer to him?
Wait, is this the one where it's like all black underneath?
That's Giru.
Sure, bring up a picture.
So there he is.
Oh, that's hideous.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the look, a little too smooth, and he's very toyetic. He combines with the Garuda. He looks less like an actual robot and more like a toy.
Yeah.
He has no personality. He isn't a character at all. He's a vehicle. People drive him. Pilots inside of his head.
So he's not even a real monster. Pinocchio of the kaiju world.
This version of MechaGodzilla is kind of lame. He's certainly not as cool as the 70s version. However, the new version of Rodan is fantastic.
Remember, he looked like Rodan.
I've always found Rodan a somewhat awkward design. This one really streamlines him, makes him look more like a real pterodactyl.
Yeah. I love the bat wings.
At the end of the film, for the first time, Rodan gets a beam weapon. He absorbs a little more radiation and he gets the ability to breathe fire. Finally. And,
Amen, brother.
And I really like Baby's look, too. He's not like Minnie-La. Baby Godzilla is still cute, but it also looked like a newborn Godzilla. At the end of the film, when it finally meets up with Godzilla, it's frightened by him at first. Who wouldn't be? It's a giant fucking dinosaur. Let's get to the fight.
Yes. What's the button to make a fight?
Godzilla and Rodan have a confrontation on the island. When Rodan pecks at his head, he's pecking so hard and so fast that it makes sparks. Rodan has this bond with Baby. When the government is shipping Baby and Azusa in a giant shipping crate over a helicopter, Rodan blows up the helicopter and then grabs the crate with his feet, which is hilarious.
And then he guards over the crate there for a while, doesn't he?
Until MechaGodzilla throws him into a building, which is another great stunt. In this movie, MechaGodzilla actually kills Godzilla. They study Baby's physiology and realize that Godzilla has a second brain in his back. They give MechaGodzilla the G-Crusher, an electrified grappling hook that shoots into Godzilla's back. Is this the end of Godzilla? This is one of the most contrived things about the script. Rodan gets back up, flies over, gets shot with a laser beam, and it lands on Godzilla, dies. Godzilla absorbs Rodan's radiation, and that rejuvenates him. And then MechaGodzilla blows up real good.
Godzilla blows up real good.
Yeah. Godzilla puts out radiation in the air, which causes MechaGodzilla's armor to melt. He gets a red spiral beam weapon, and he explodes, man.
So wait, Godzilla gets a red spiral beam weapon?
He puts more energy into his beam weapon. That's what it's called, the red spiral beam weapon. Godzilla's finishing move.
Wow.
Even though this film is a bit uneven, if nothing else, it delivers on the action.
Godzilla bursting through time to claim the raw power of 2 miles. With crushing roar, monstrous smash attack, and primordial power. But when SpaceGodzilla joins the monstrous double cross, who will rule Doom Island? Godzilla Doom Island action figures, each sold separately from Trendmasters.
For the next film, they decided to shake it up a little bit. They brought in a new creative team. The next film was directed by Kinsho Yamashita, and it was written by Hiroshi Kashiwabara and Kanji Kashiwa.
Bless you.
This was everybody's first Godzilla film. The quality of the final product reflects in the fact that the director and one of the writers never worked again. I'm talking about Godzilla vs. SpaceGodzilla, widely regarded as the weakest of the Heisei period, which I agree with. I don't know if you agree with it.
It's probably the weakest, but I'm a little bit of a SpaceGodzilla supporter, and I know you don't like it, but I like the monster design. Then you have issues with the fact he's got really big shoulders and little tiny arms. Maintain that that's because he's psychic.
I don't see the correlation between giant shoulders and psychic abilities.
The crystals give him his power.
The reason he's given telekinetic abilities is because he has those stupid little arms that he can't move because he has these giant shoulders. So there's no way they could have wrestled.
No, he has those tiny arms because he's telekinetic and doesn't have to use them.
Okay, sure.
Darwinism, man. Darwinism.
The SpaceGodzilla suit represents the Heisei Era's worst tendencies. He's over-muscled, he's over-designed, and he's overpowered. He is to Godzilla as Venom is to Spider-Man.
People like Venom.
The biggest issue with this movie is that its script is really all over the place. The UNGCC has a new plan. Let's shoot Godzilla with a button, make us control him. Okay, seems sound, and for a backup they got another huge-ass robot named Mogira. Miki, who is still around, and then 2 other guys, they don't want to destroy Godzilla. But this other guy named Yuki definitely wants to destroy Godzilla. Oh, and then SpaceGodzilla shows up.
One problem I do have is
What?
the baby design in this.
Little Godzilla, as he's called here, he's not well liked. He is more reminiscent of Minnie-La.
He looked very anime-esque.
He's got great big anime eyes, and he's definitely designed for maximum cuteness. Instead of breathing smoke rings, he breathes bubbles. How much cuter could we make this character?
They're atomic bubbles.
Yeah, they're radioactive bubbles. I actually kind of like Little Godzilla. I agree the design is way too cute, but he's got this furious streak about him. When SpaceGodzilla first shows up, he walks up to him like, "Hey, who are you? What's going on, guy?" And I got a soft spot for him.
Let's go back to SpaceGodzilla here.
What's SpaceGodzilla's origin?
He's Godzilla from space.
How was he created,
Well,
JD?
like Godzilla's DNA goes up into space, it combines with the space crystal, and he gets SpaceGodzilla. Who cares about that shit? We just want to see him fight.
Why does he want to destroy Earth? Because he's evil, man.
SpaceGodzilla is Godzilla's id personified.
I think it's just bad writing.
Whatever. I agree that the big ass crystals on the shoulders are a little much.
Dorky as hell.
But the crystal forehead and...
Oh, the big brown on his head. No, I don't like that.
I like that. I like a lot of the stuff about Space Godzilla. I mean, I know that I tend to go for the psychic people. Anyone that listens to this podcast knows that.
Figure that out by now.
They actually gave him different things to do. He can fly, he can summon crystals.
I didn't know you had so much to say about Space Godzilla. This movie's pacing is all over the place. Its script has all these ideas that doesn't really develop.
No one cares about this.
Project T, trying to control Godzilla telekinetically. It's an interesting idea. The film doesn't... Whatever. The film doesn't really bring it up. Major Yuki's plot of revenge doesn't really go anywhere. And then the worst thing is in the middle of the movie, the Yakuza kidnapped Miki. Heroes of the film have to go and rescue her. Suddenly, in addition to being a telepath, she has telekinetic powers too. She levitates her bed into the air. When the guy asked her, how did you do that? She said, I just tried really hard. And I like that the film tries to make Miki more of a main character, but I dislike the fact that she becomes damsel in distress.
Yeah, I do hate that. They completely ruin her in this film.
What do you think of the other monster in this movie, Mothra?
No one cares about Mothra. He's a cheap knockoff of MechaGodzilla. And the only reason they didn't put MechaGodzilla in this damn film is because they didn't want 3 Godzillas in one film.
You are exactly correct about that. Mothra, again, he is very toyetic because he turns into 2 different robots, a spaceship and a drilling thing, and the design is very awkward. He seems less heavily armed than MechaGodzilla. The drill nose, that just doesn't seem very practical. And SpaceGodzilla's telekinesis is brought to life very convincingly. I like Godzilla being lifted into the air and then smashed through a building. It doesn't make any sense, but it's cool. But some of the effects in this film are unforgivably bad. Do you remember the scene where Mothra and SpaceGodzilla are fighting in the asteroid belt? Styrofoam balls glued to a big velvet background?
Yeah.
It's really bad. What about Fairy Mothra? The little cute chibi Mothra that appears in one scene. It's a puppet. It looks like a puppet. Obviously, you like the film more than I do.
I'm not saying it's a good film. I think Space Godzilla was an interesting idea.
Godzilla's final fight will be a memorable one. He needs no introduction. His glaring eyes and gnashing teeth, not to mention his habit of destroying everything in sight, has made this overgrown lizard a superstar. But in his 22nd film, Godzilla vs. the Destroyer, the 42-year-old monster will finally meet his end. Godzilla will die.
Destroyer!
Toho was aware that the series was maybe running out of steam a little bit. In 1995, an American studio, TriStar, bought the rights to Godzilla and started developing their own Godzilla film. Toho naively assumed that an American Godzilla series would become very successful. They said, we should bring the Heisei period to an end so that our films aren't competing with the American films. Godzilla's gotta die. Superman died in the 90s, Batman got his bat broke, and decided Godzilla had to die too. Thus, 1995's Godzilla vs. Destroyer! This film has a very effective opening. Panning over Hong Kong, it seems very peaceful. Suddenly, Godzilla appears out of nowhere and starts wrecking shit. Godzilla is covered with giant red burning swords, and he seems a little more pissed off than usual.
Just a little.
Clearly, something is wrong with him. They determine that Godzilla has gone nuclear. He's overheating, and he's going to melt down. And when Godzilla melts down, he is going to basically bring about the end of the world. He will explode with such energy that the world will be cut in two, which is bad. Meanwhile, a scientist develops something he calls micro-oxygen. He believes that this will change the world, this will change energy. And everybody else says, yeah, but what if they use it for weapons? And he says, that's not going to happen. To prove him wrong,
Nature makes a new kaiju.
Nature intervenes. The micro-oxygen mingles with microscopic organisms in Tokyo Bay and births a new terrifying monster named Destroyer. Now the government is hoping that 2 monsters will destroy each other and prevent the end of the world. I really, really like this movie. This is one of the best in this period. Most people agree with that. It is, quote-unquote, last Godzilla movie. So they bring things full circle. They bring back a lot of elements from the original. Momiko Okoji returns as Emiko, who is still haunted by Godzilla and Dr. Shirazawa's death. Dr. Yamane, her father, his adopted grandchildren are major characters in the film. His grandson is sort of a boy genius and the one that comes up with the theory that Godzilla's melting down. It brings the series full circle. It tries to connect with the past. What do you think of Burning Godzilla, as he's called?
I love it. I love that design.
I've got a toy of Burning Godzilla in my hand here. Yeah, he is definitely fearsome looking. The Heisei Godzilla was already fierce, but by covering him in burning stars, he looks sick, but also looks badass.
When he's walking in the cold air, hits the hot red, steam is coming up out of there. He's steaming mad. He's burning mad.
He's more dangerous than ever. I love that the film doesn't back away from showing what would happen if Godzilla melts down. Again, it literally shows the planet exploding. Government cooks up freeze rays. That only slows him down for a little bit. Godzilla's gonna melt down and there's not anything we can do about it. End of the world is imminent. In this mess, you've also got Destroyer showing up. I mentioned earlier how Biollante was the offspring of germ warfare. Keeping up with that, Destroyer is the offspring of the Oxygen Destroyer, the next terrible super weapon incarnate. And it makes sense to have Godzilla fighting the physical embodiment of the thing that originally killed him in the first place anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Design-wise, Destroyer is certainly imposing and impressive.
Imposing and impressive, indeed. My one gripe is that he looks a little bit too much like a Power Ranger villain.
I guess, but if he was a Power Ranger villain, he would be the scariest Power Ranger villain.
Right. 4 wings, a big head, big body, and a clawed tail.
I love the pincher tail. My biggest problem is earlier in the film, when Destroyer first appears as a giant crab-like creature, that sequence is a definite ripoff of Aliens. Destroyer even has the second jaw inside of his mouth. It's fine, but yeah, you guys obviously had just watched that movie. But the final form is definitely imposing. He's giant wings and this huge horn on his head, and he's covered with spikes. The horn is like a lightsaber.
Which is awesome.
Which is awesome, yeah. In addition to ending the Godzilla series, it also finishes a plotline that we've been following over the last 3 films. Baby Godzilla comes of age. He grows up into Godzilla Jr.
He decides that he's going to fight Destroyer. He gets his ass handed to him.
Destroyer punches a huge hole in him. The assumption is that because Godzilla Jr. has bonded with humans all his life, he would be a friendlier Godzilla. At least he would have if he get killed in the course of the film. Indeed, that happens. Godzilla, on the verge of melting down, meets up with his son at an airport. Destroyer, like dick he is, swoops down, grabs Godzilla Jr. with his tail, lifts him up in the air, and drops him on a building. Godzilla goes up to his son, and Godzilla Jr. is dying. He tries to breathe nuclear breath into his son, but it doesn't work. Godzilla Jr. dies. I never cried.
Oh, no. Me neither.
Yeah, me neither.
It totally wasn't like Holy Yeller.
You do feel quite a bit of sympathy with the monsters. Okay, now he's pissed.
You done fucked up now.
Yeah. That leads us into the big final fight between Godzilla and Destroyer. Godzilla's got nothing to lose at this point. He's dying, his son is dead, he goes all out. Really is one of the most vicious and impressive fights in the Heisei period. They're blowing giant chunks off of each other, and yellow blood is flying everywhere. Some people probably were disappointed. The original plot, Godzilla was gonna melt down, and he was gonna take Destroyer with him. But then Toho said, that will distract from the death of Godzilla. The military destroy Destroyer. They freeze him with the freeze rays, and he collapses and shatters. When I first saw the movie, I was a little disappointed, but in retrospect, I think it was the right decision. Because Godzilla's death is such an important part of this film that it needs to be the clear focus.
Did he shatter before Godzilla exploded?
He shatters before Godzilla melts down, just as he's about to melt down.
Damn.
Godzilla does melt down. He starts burning so hot that his spines actually melt. He's dying. And even then, the military will not leave him alone. They are pelting him with freeze rays, trying to contain the explosion. Come on, guys. Can't I get a moment of peace? That death scene is so powerful.
He lets out this dome of red energy.
Akira Ifukube came back for this, and it was actually his last score. He died not long after this. Music that plays as Godzilla is melting down really makes the scene so powerful. Dr. Yamani's grandson and Nikki are watching this happen, and they are accepting the end of the world, and they say, we created Godzilla in the first place, so this is our fault. Brings the original Godzilla's message all the way back around.
Yeah.
But if the world doesn't end, something happens. The end of the world is staved off at the last minute. Turns out, Godzilla Jr. was not all the way dead. He was just alive enough that he absorbs the radiation from his dying father. When I first saw this movie years ago on television, I didn't immediately get that what was happening. The radiation levels drop, and you see a new Godzilla emerge out of the smoke. In my brain, when I first saw that, said, oh, well, this is the movie's way of saying Godzilla dies, but his legacy lives forever.
Fuck yeah! This is probably in my top 5 Godzilla movies.
It's up there.
Let's talk about what really killed Godzilla.
1998, the year of Godzilla.
We know where he came from. We know how big he is.
His situation has become more complicated.
But our problems just multiplied.
He's pregnant.
I think I need a bigger box.
As I said earlier, Toho decided to end the Godzilla series because an American studio was making a Godzilla film. An American Godzilla movie has been tossed around since the 80s. At one point in the 80s, Steve Miner, the director of Friday the 13th Part 2 and 3 and House and Warlock, all these great 80s horror movies, was going to direct a 3D Godzilla movie written by Fred Decker of Night of the Creeps and Monster Squad fame that would have featured a stop-motion Godzilla. And you're thinking, like, that sounds awesome. That movie didn't get made. After Jurassic Park made $1 gazillion, TriStar said, okay, well, we need a dinosaur movie. Let's wire the rights to Godzilla. Jean DeBont, the director of Speed, was going to direct a Godzilla movie that would have featured a Stan Winston-designed Godzilla. You can go online and find this design. It looks awesome. And he would have fought a giant griffin. That movie probably would have been pretty cheesy, but still a lot of fun. It would have cost too much money. So TriStar found Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin, who had just done Independence Day. Somewhat ironically, their film ended up costing more than DeBont's Godzilla film would have cost.
Ha.
Do you remember the advertising campaign for the 1998 Godzilla?
You never saw it.
No, you didn't. They kept the monster mysterious.
I remember the Taco Bell dog. I'm going to need a bigger box.
Yeah, there was that. Do you remember the New Year's Eve teaser? People in Times Square celebrating the ball dropping, and then you see Godzilla's tail swing in and smash the ball and fling it towards the audience. Then that tagline, size does matter. That was everywhere. They plastered that all over everything.
Or, we're going to need bigger guns.
Were you really excited for this film when it came out?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was pumped.
And they always showed that fucking scene where he's coming towards the bridge with the spines and the water.
And I feel like only showing glimpses of him was an interesting interesting advertising idea. But yeah, I was excited for this film. When you saw it, were you disappointed?
Yeah, well, I remember being in theaters when they killed Godzilla at the end. I screamed, "The government doesn't kill Godzilla!"
And that is precisely right. When fans on the internet first got a look at this version of Godzilla, they immediately dubbed it Gino, Godzilla in name only. Design-wise, I agree with that. He doesn't look anything like Godzilla. When they first showed a picture of this, my mom looked at it and said, it looks like leftover parts from Jurassic Park. The only thing that identifies it as Godzilla is the big spines on its back.
Yeah.
But it's not so much the design is the reason people dislike this character, so much as it is his behavior. This Godzilla runs away. He spends the whole movie running away from the military. Godzilla wouldn't do that.
Well, you know what it is, Zach? The Americans cannot imagine that their army would be defeated by a giant monster.
And maybe you're right. He doesn't breathe fire. There's that really stupid scene at the end where he does a super belch. That shit does not count. And the most absurd thing is the death scene. He gets killed by missiles. Not super missiles, just regular missiles. Okay, so it's not a Godzilla movie. Does it work on its own terms? No, it doesn't. The screenplay is incredibly dumb.
I hear him correct someone on Totopoulos one more time.
Nobody treats Godzilla as this terrible threat that's going to destroy the world. He's just treated as an inconvenience. They spend a lot of the time complaining about how traffic is bad because of the monster.
And they should have named the movie Godzilla vs. Ferris Bueller.
The military is so dumb in this movie. They do more damage to New York than the monster does. They blow up the Chrysler building, they blow up the Flatiron building, and then the most ridiculous scene is a scene that doesn't even make sense. Godzilla's in the Hudson Bay, and they've got submarines, and they're trying to shoot Godzilla with the missiles. He somehow dodges the missiles, and the military blows up their own submarine. Think of how many people just got killed. And all the characters are stereotypes. The Audrey character, the reporter who will do anything for a story. Her cameraman, played by Hank Azaria. Animal, yeah, I'm from New York. Godzilla doesn't scare me. Oh, all the French characters in the film are named Jean Paul, or Jean-Claude, something like that. In order to appear more American, they chew gum and speak like Elvis.
There is one little French joke in there I like. You call this coffee? It's French roast.
No, that's stupid.
Well, I kind of like that.
Godzilla is the French government's fault. It's not the American government's fault. It's not the Japanese government's fault. It's some other country's fault. We are not responsible for making the monster. So the film is completely bankrupt on a subtextual level. It's amazing how boring this film is. Middle of the movie where they're in Madison Square Garden with the baby Godzillas, and it becomes a really lame Jurassic Park ripoff. The whole time you're just rolling your eyes thinking, get back to Godzilla.
The toys were cooler than the movie.
Absolutely.
The Godzilla toys actually breathed fire.
I know, I had a bunch of the toys, and they were awesome. What do you think of Matthew Broderick in this film?
I feel like he wasn't the worst part of this movie.
He seems like he's not there. So bland. This movie has a good cast. It's got John Reno, Hank Azaria, Michael Lerner, Harry Shearer. These are all talented actors. They do the best they can do with what they're given, and they're not given a lot. None of the Toho films bore me, and this one bores me. As rightly despised as Gino, which is what I still call it to this day, is, it did do two things. A lot of the classic films got reissued on VHS, and the film overall reignited interest in Godzilla. And the movie also had a Saturday morning cartoon show spin-off that is generally better regarded than the movie that spawned it. Godzilla the series, which ran from 98 to 2000, featured a Godzilla that breathes fire, fights other monsters, can take a hit, and doesn't run away. So it's already more of a Godzilla than its dad. I watched when it was on the air, and then I went back the last week, I watched the whole series. There's a robot named Nigel. Every episode, Nigel gets destroyed. Every single episode, Nigel gets crushed or blown up or set on fire. A PG version of, oh my god, you killed Kenny, you bastards. And one of the things that is a lot of fun about Godzilla the series, they couldn't use the other monsters. They didn't have the rights to use the other monsters. They would create uncopyrighted versions of the characters. In one episode, Godzilla fights a nanotech machine designed to eat pollution. It's obviously Ghidorah. There's a creature that exists only in the dreams of a person called the Crackler. Okay, that's inspired by Ghidorah. A giant bird, Quetzalcoatl, Rodan. And one of the best episodes has Godzilla fighting what at first appears to be a giant Yeti. Godzilla sets it on fire and the Yeti skin burns off and it's a robot gorilla underneath. There's both King Kong and Mecha Kong. A story arc in the middle of the first season called Monster Wars, where aliens show up, take control of all the monsters, and start to conquer Earth. Gee, that sounds familiar. That's the plot to destroy all monsters. During that storyline, the aliens take the corpse of the first Zilla and turn it into a cyborg. There's MechaGodzilla. There's a giant centipede that turns into a giant moth. An episode that is a straight-up homage or ripoff of John Carpenter's The Thing. He even used the line, I don't know which one of you could be that thing. For a Godzilla fan, it's fun to pick out what are obviously references to classic films in the series. I just want to talk about a couple episodes here that are really good. There's one called Deadlock, where Godzilla fights the Loch Ness Monster. You find out Nessie is attacking people not because she's evil, but because the scientists have stolen her baby.
Oh yeah, I remember that episode.
The scientist is played by Roddy McDowall, and that was his last performance before he died. There's an episode called Clash of the Titans, where an evil millionaire is staging giant monster fights on a private island. End of the line, where Zilla gets a love interest. He meets a giant radioactive Komodo dragon, and they fall in love and they try to raise an egg together. But the best episode of the series is called Scale. It's a found footage episode. This TV show totally predicted Cloverfield. Revisiting Godzilla the animated series, it's easily better than the movie. I really enjoyed it. Well, that brings this episode to an end, I think. If you have any thoughts about Gino or SpaceGodzilla, you can email us at bangersinmash88@yahoo.com. We've got a Facebook. If anybody else wants to like us, please do. Thank you again, Bill. Wow, we're almost done our Godzilla marathon here, JD.
Are we?
Yeah.
One more week.
Just one more week until the new movie comes out. Oh shit. Stay stompy and keep your trunk strong. We'll be back soon.
High five.